So this is Golden Age. This is volume 3 in the Last 100 Years trilogy. It begins in 1987, and it ends in 2019. In order to find out what's coming, you just have to buy it. And I enjoy reading from it, and I like to read parts that I haven't read before. So I'm going to start with something I have read, and then I'm going to read something I haven't read before. And my favorite part is questions. So don't hesitate, I answer everything. So the trilogy goes year by year, from 1920 to 2019. Every year is about equal. And this is 1990. And the character whose point of view this is Charlie. Charlie is a young man who turned up in volume 2, a little bit of a surprise, but a darling boy. So he encounters Michael. Michael, one of the main characters is Frank. The firstborn child is Frank. Born in 1920, he has 3 children, Janet and 2 twins, Michael and Richie. So now it's 1990. Michael and Richie were born in 1953. Charlie was thrilled with Manhattan. He'd never imagined how wild the city itself was. And if you started at the southwest corner of Central Park, across from Columbus Circle, and ran north through Central Park to the corner of 110th Street and Cathedral Parkway, then down 110th Street a block to the southwest corner of Morningside Park, north from there to 123rd Street, then over to Park, then followed that park down to where it ended at 72nd Street, and then east on 72nd to Central Park West and south again to Columbus Circle. It was only about 9 miles, an easy run. He'd wangled a clerk's job at a luggage store and had submitted his application to an outdoor outfitter's on Broadway. He and Riley were earning enough to rent a much-infested studio on 125th Street, though he told his mom it was on 98th Street. His mom is from St. Louis. And she says she vacationed in the Ozarks and was proud that Missouri had all 5 indigenous American poisonous snakes right within its borders. Iowa was flat, Kansas was dry, Arkansas was hot, and Illinois was damp. That was all she needed to know. Their furnishings were sparse. A gray futon on a metal frame, 2 bookcases, a table for a desk, 3 chairs, some dishes and cooking utensils, and a collection of mouse, rat, fly, mosquito, and roach traps. Since the reunion, he'd exchanged a few letters with Minnie, Christmas cards with Jesse and Jen, 2 phone calls with Debbie, and 1 with Arthur. His mom had written Arthur and heard back, sent baby pictures, and one of Charlie's funnier report cards from 3rd grade. Quote, reads backwards with unusual skill, must be prevented from walking the top of the monkey bars, unquote. Arthur had sent 2 pictures of Tim as a child, but his mom hadn't yet forwarded them. Debbie wrote his mom that Janet had been in contact with his birth mother. Charlie didn't remember who Janet was, and he didn't blame his birth mother. His mom said that if she lived in Pasadena, California, it was probably better not to have anything to do with her. His luggage store, 4 blocks south of Central Park, had some nice stuff. Charlie was rearranging the counter display for January markdowns when Michael entered. Michael's glance passed over him without a mote of recognition. Charlie shifted his own expression from friendly to professional and went back to the wallets. Lisa, Jackie, and Mark were behind the counter. They'd just been arguing about where Jackie should go skiing over the weekend. Michael went straight to Lisa and said, hello there. Lisa, who lived with her parents at 88th and York, was working here as a punishment for dropping out of Connecticut College for Women after the first semester of her sophomore year. She gave Michael a warm smile. All 4 of them were good at this since they worked on commission. Michael set his briefcase on the counter and regarded it. Lisa said, may I help you, sir? Michael flipped the briefcase over and pointed at something along the side. He said, "Do you see that stain, the oil stain?" Lisa bent down, but she didn't really look at it. She said, "I do, sir. I'd be happy to send that to our repair shop. I'm sure Giorgio could get it out." "I would always know it was there," said Michael. "Giorgio is really, I need a new one." Charlie could practically see Lisa salivating. "This one is Bottega Veneta," she said. "I'm sorry, but we don't carry that brand. I can show you." "I'm sure you can," said Michael. "Some comparable styles, however. Do you prefer Italian boutiques, sir?" Michael gave her a brilliant smile, and she matched him. Then he said, "This is a few years old. I personally think Bottega Veneta has gotten a little too flashy lately." He surveyed the golden lit displays along the walls and said, "What's that one?" Lisa pirouetted neatly and said, "Such a lovely piece. That's an Asprey. Let me also show you the Volextra. They're Italian, but based in Milan, not quite as Baroque as Bottega Veneta." Charlie almost snorted with the pleasure of it. Michael went through the curtain into the stockroom. The wallets were now in a perfect line. Charlie stepped a foot to the left and started coiling belts. Lisa set 2 briefcases on the counter. They were both brown, the Asprey edging toward cordovan, the Volextra edging toward buckskin. She smoothed her hand over one and then the other. Michael said, Charlie moved even further left, caught Jackie's glance, and stepped into the window, afraid he was going to make real noise. He could still hear them, though. "That is Ninth's letter. The best. The English is a little conservative. I hate to look stuffy. I totally understand. On the other hand, as I get older, I wouldn't worry about that, sir. I really wouldn't." Pause. "I am drawn to the Volextra. I've looked at those before." The Volextra was maybe 30% more expensive than the Asprey. Lisa said, "It's a rare piece. It's not for everyone. We sell maybe one a season, but I always think..." She had been working there for 2 weeks. Charlie went deeper into the corner beside the window. Outside, a woman passed him, her nose in a guidebook. She stopped, looked toward the street sign, then opened the door of the shop. Charlie saw Jackie interrupt her. They went back out the door. The show went on. Lisa said in a regretful, almost lachrymose voice, "I have to tell you, sir, the Volextra is a $1,500 item." There was a long pause, and Charlie peeked out from behind the stack of Toomies. Michael had one hand on the Asprey and one hand on the Volextra, and he was stroking them gently with a half smile on his face. Then he hoisted the Volextra and gave a deep sigh, matched an instant later by Lisa. The curtain to the stockroom fluttered. Mark was watching too. Michael said, "How much is the Asprey?" A pregnant pause. Then Lisa's voice half broke when she said, $1,100. Michael looked straight at her and said, "I'll give you $1,100 for the Volextra." But he said it cheerfully with a grin, as if he were joking. Lisa responded, we don't usually, 13 is as low as I can go. The manager is in Italy looking at new collections. I don't think..." Another pause. Outside, the confused lady had walked on, and Jackie was talking to someone else, who was bundled in a full-length black down coat. Michael shrugged, took his briefcase off the counter, gave Lisa one last winning smile, and turned for the door. Lisa let him get there, let him put his black gloves on, let him touch the handle, then said, 12 is okay. I can do 12 for you." She put on a regretfully redeemed expression, and Michael strode back to the counter, a win-win situation. Everyone was happy, including Charlie, who knew that they sold the Volextra full price for $1,100. Mark came out of the back looking genial but uninterested, and Michael and Lisa completed the transaction. When Lisa put on her coat and they went out together, Lisa told Mark she was taking an early lunch. Michael still didn't recognize Charlie, but he did smile at him this time. It was Charlie's job to make jokes and tell funny stories, and it was Riley's job to laugh. But she didn't laugh when he told her about Lisa and Michael. She was offended. Charlie had learned to make no assumptions about how Riley might be offended. Could be anything. Ripping off Michael, Lisa going off with him. But of course it was the waste that offended her. Getting rid of a perfectly good leather item because of a small stain, and calfskin at that. Did Charlie know how much grain went into feeding cattle? This brought her around to hemp again, as so many things did. Or bamboo. Bamboo was very interesting, and Charlie heard all about it over the roasted vegetables and grilled goat cheese sandwiches they had for dinner. The cheese was from the shores of Cayuga Lake, and that was where Riley wanted to go on their first trip out of the city. So several things happened, some of them quite amusing, like, oh, thank you. My favorite one, I think, is that Michael's very sweet but somewhat dim-witted twin brother, Richie, gets elected to Congress, and from Brooklyn. And so when I dedicated the book, I did dedicate it partly to, in thanks to the Congress for being so easy to satirize. Now, the whole trilogy begins on a farm in Iowa, in Denby, Iowa, and 4 of the original 5 kids get off the farm. One stays on the farm, that's Joe, and he loves the farm. And his son is Jesse, and Jesse's the farmer in this book. And Jesse has 2 sons and a daughter, Guthrie, Perky, and Felicity. And I'm gonna, I lost my page. Darn it. I'll have to find the page again. I'm going to read a little bit from, oh no, I didn't, I turned the page, okay. I'm gonna read a little bit. There's a war in every volume. And so the first volume, it's the Second World War, and the second volume, it's the Vietnam War. And in this volume, it's the Iraq War. And I'm gonna read, and Guthrie's the one who signs up and goes off to Iraq. And so this takes place in, I believe, 2005. This is his second deployment. So I'm going to read a couple of scenes from that. Then we can have questions. So this is rather late in his deployment. And he has a friend who is very observant. And he views this friend as kind of the person he needs to observe in order to be safe. And his friend's name is Harper. Harper is from Wyoming. Guthrie didn't like it when he and Harper got different assignments, especially if his assignment included driving the road between Baghdad and the airport, which is about as dangerous as any road in Iraq. Maybe not a bomb, but maybe yes. But rocket fires, sniping, mortar attacks. He had worried about the insurgency when he was first deployed, and all of his worries had been not nearly enough. The plane. Who was in the plane? It was a cargo plane. It was coming in and then started circling. Guthrie hunkered down behind the security perimeter at the airport, could see it approach, turn, disappear under the cloud cover. But the pilot seemed determined to land, then he did land. And everyone on the plane was hurried to a helicopter, and that took off without being shot down. Guthrie could see Condoleezza Rice get off the plane and into the helicopter. Only a few other people went with her. Guthrie and his squad then accompanied the rest of them into Baghdad on the road. No explosions. Insurgent recon wasn't always very good. Harper was assigned to get her from the helipad to the green zone. He carried a machine gun and stayed a few paces behind her. He heard her asking about Saddam Hussein. Where was he? What was he doing? What was going on with the trial? Guthrie had forgotten that Saddam was still alive. Harper had also heard someone ask her about a book that had been published, but he didn't hear what it was. Apparently it was uncomplimentary because she had stopped walking, snorted, and gotten huffy about it. The guy behind her had almost knocked her down. She was a pain in the ass, said Harper. Not because she wanted to be a pain in the ass, but because she was used to being listened to and respected. She was used to the lights not going out. She was used to standing in a certain way, walking in a certain way. Harper, who was as cool as a cat, came home freaked out after they put her back on the plane and chased her away. That no one had shot her or blown her up was just a matter of luck, he thought. Harper stayed freaked out. When they went on patrols in eastern or western Baghdad, Harper was jumpier than anyone else. One night, Guthrie asked him about it. He said, "It's like we've gone over some edge where there's just too much shit going on. You know, what scares me most? It's not being killed. It's being blown up but not dying. Used to be they got you or they didn't. Now they only get part of you. If the medics rush in and they do their shit and they think they are doing you a favor saving most of you, but are they? I think about that every time we go out on a fucking patrol." Guthrie tried not to think about anything. Even when Casson was shot in the neck and Peters had his leg blown off, Guthrie kept his thoughts muffled down, flat, stuffed away somewhere. He would deal with it later. He also stopped talking to Harper about stuff because Harper was rattled, talking in his sleep. Guthrie thought maybe Harper had never confronted any situation before where he didn't know his way around, but he wasn't the only one. The guys who'd had their deployments extended were worse. The Army said it was only 6 weeks or a month, but everyone knew that once you started down that road, there would be no end. You joined up. They said they'd give you certain guarantees in exchange for the fact that you could get killed or worse. And then those guarantees turned out not to be guarantees at all, but just crap. He'd never thought he'd say this, but thank the Lord he didn't have a girlfriend back home, or for fuck's sake, a wife. Those guys were the worst. They tried to keep in touch, or they didn't try to keep in touch. They tried to have something to live for, or they were restless with longing, or the worst, they didn't give a shit anymore, but they didn't dare say anything about it. And where were the hookers? According to Harper, World War II had been all about hookers, and in Vietnam, the soldiers had access to hookers like no American had ever seen before. But no hookers in Iraq, at least that anyone Guthrie knew had discovered. Harper said the hookers were practically a soldier's right. No hookers and the female soldiers expecting not to be hit on. It was an impossible situation. One night, Guthrie and Harper talked about how you would run a war if you could do it right. The only thing they could come up with was a standing army of 14-year-olds who didn't know what death was, who would never be allowed back home, who would be conditioned and trained to kill or be killed, who would be bred to the game and then penned up, though treated well after the war was over. Not an all-volunteer army, but an army of purebreds, like racehorses or hogs. It made them laugh while they were talking about it. But then Harper talked in his sleep again, and Guthrie didn't get any sleep at all. A little space. Everyone was superstitious about approaching the end of their deployment. Only an idiot talked about what he was going to do when he got home. Harper said that there was no objective reason to believe that you were in more danger in the last weeks or hours before they got you out of this hellhole, but still he did not say what he was going to do when he got home. Even so, things entered Guthrie's mind. When he heard about the Shiites kidnapping of dozens of Sunnis from the Ministry of Higher Education, he got the image of the Memorial Union at Iowa State. He'd been there on a school trip senior year and was impressed by it. When the Sunnis then attacked the health ministry, he couldn't help imagining the big square white buildings of Usherton Hospital, where he'd gone once after a basketball game for an ankle x-ray. Baghdad was nothing at all like Usherton. Maybe it was like Phoenix, but he didn't want to think that either. Sadr City he did not mistake for anywhere he'd ever been. There were palm trees, there was heat, there was chaos, there was dirt. There were donkey carts, there were holes blasted in walls and doors. There was beautiful Arabic writing in black and blue on white walls. There were lines of people waiting to go into a bank. There were women in full black burqas, men in long robes, and children running and jumping everywhere with hardly anything on. There were soldiers aiming their weapons around corners, standing beside women sitting on the pavement holding babies. There was a terrible stink. There was the absolute flatness of the landscape, absolute flat blueness of the sky. There was an everlasting rolling blast of noise, and sometimes, or at least that one time, there was a series of huge explosions in the middle of the afternoon when 5 car bombs went off, one after the other, in a square that Guthrie had walked through the day before. And after that, there were bodies and blood and rubble and mess. No one could stop them, no matter who wanted to or how much they wanted to. The folks back in Washington could say this or that. They could ask for more money in addition to the millions of dollars per day that they were spending. But it was all for naught. And everyone in Guthrie's unit knew that, as well as they knew their own names. Little space. A week left. Go out on patrol. Be glad it was cold and the streets were more or less empty. 6 days. Work at the checkpoint, hope that no one would appear, scream at anyone who even twitched an eyebrow the wrong way. 5 days. Go out on patrol again. Go slow. Watch for doorways and corners. Don't say anything about the future. Day 4. Go out on patrol again, this time in Karbala, not Sadr City. Don't look at the women. Every billow and every burqa could be a bomb. Don't look at the fingers of your friend lighting his cigarette. They are trembling. Remind yourself that the Americans had nothing to do with the execution of Saddam Hussein. He had been tried by his fellow Iraqis, found guilty of crimes against humanity, and now is going to be hanged. Most of the guys in Guthrie's unit had seen that picture of Saddam and Rumsfeld shaking hands in the 80s, but most of them didn't care. Few enlisted even for practical reasons than patriotic reasons or religious reasons. There were guys scattered about who had imagined in another lifetime that they were going to witness to the Iraqis and show them how to be saved. But nobody did that when they got their boots on the ground. Then you did not pretend to understand the ins and outs of 2 guys shaking hands one day and attacking each other another day. But Harper knew something that Guthrie didn't know, that the Shiites in the government had chosen to hang Saddam on the worst possible day, some sort of holy day. Harper said it was like they hung the Pope on Christmas, or even Good Friday. It was like they handed their enemies a martyr. One of the other guys said that was pretty rich, Saddam Hussein as a martyr or a victim, and Harper just shrugged. He didn't care anymore what you thought or whether you agreed with him. He was just waiting, like they were all just waiting. What they knew was that when Saddam was hanged, no matter how secret that might be, everyone would know instantly, and the Sunnis would go bananas, and Baghdad would have another one of those weeks, most casualties since the invasion. 1 day to go. The afternoon of Saddam's hanging, the skies were cloudy and the weather was damp. It could get that way. You didn't know whether you wanted to be wearing all your gear or not. They were assigned a checkpoint. First car that came through seemed harmless, a family, a veiled wife, a husband who was friendly, 3 kids in the back seat. Behind them, close behind them, were 3 guys, maybe 19 years old. They seemed jumpy and impatient. Their old, dirty car bumped against the back of the family's car. Harper, Corning, and Randall made them reverse, get out, leave the doors open. Then the 3 kids cocked their weapons, gave the guys the once-over, and sent them back the way they came. A farmer went through in a little truck with a couple of goats in the back. A man in Western clothes went through in a rather nice car, papers on the front seat. The jumpy guys did not return. The weather warmed up and the clouds dissipated. Off in the distance, they heard the boom of an explosion, saw a flare. It was too far away for them to hear the screams. Randall made a face and said, "Happy New Year." So as you can see, it has various different moods, as does the whole trilogy. So, it's 6:42. Let's have some questions. I love questions. I have relatives in the audience, so if nobody asks any questions, then the relatives will be required to ask questions.
in those short little pieces, having read all three of them, you really do develop their characters. But at what point do you know sort of which one is going to do what?
Well, first of all, I had to know who each one was. And so the way I did that was to give them qualities as babies and children. And so as soon as they have those qualities, I know where they're likely to go. As soon as I know where they're likely to go, then I read a lot of more detailed history than I already knew. And so I could put them in various places, or I would follow them, let's say, to various places. I tried very much in my own mind to give them intentions and a will of their own. And so once they got to those places, I just decided, I just said, okay, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Now, Guthrie lives on the farm. He does not want to be a farmer. He's in his mid-20s, early to mid-20s. And he signs up at the end of the war when, or allegedly the end of the war, when the government says its victory is won. And he discovers, no, that's not true. But for example, Felicity, who's his younger sister, she's very interested in the farm. She's much more interested than the two boys are. And so she doesn't end up taking the farm over, but she goes to school. She gets interested in agricultural issues. And I always knew from the beginning that Felicity was going to be one of those little girls who just wants to know whatever it is, everything. And so she's one of my favorite characters. So I'm quite fond of Guthrie, too. Yes?
How do you decide how much time to spend researching, let's say, a historical period versus thinking about the story?
Researching the historical period is thinking about the story. So because I didn't want every year to be really dramatic, even so there are periods when the years in the family life aren't terribly dramatic. But that's a good thing, and I know where they live, and I know what would be going on in that world, and I know how old they are, and I know how many brothers and sisters there are, and I know what their temperaments are. And so I know pretty much what sort of things they're going to do. So, for example, in the first book, Henry is born in 1932. And by the time he's 4, he's reading. He doesn't want to hang around at home anymore. So Lillian, who's a few years older, she takes him to school. And sometime in the mid-30s, there's a whole chapter about a school project that they have where the local storekeeper gives the school some leftover mattress ticking. And Henry, who's good with his fingers, sews himself a suit from his mattress ticking, an outfit, pants and a shirt. And so that sort of thing is just day-to-day stuff. But that's the kind of thing we remember from our own childhoods. And so I wanted to have plenty of that, too. But I can't say, what am I trying to say? I can't say that it just evolved, because I did do a lot of research. But the events, both small and large, presented themselves. And I said, okay, we can put somebody there. Yes?
I was so eager to read about what you were going to say about the future that I almost skipped the end.
Don't tell.
I need to say that one of the things that you predicted it literally is not going to happen. The Prime Minister of Canada.
I changed that already. I've already called the publisher and told him to change that.
Oh, you have?
I have. It's the digital age. Yeah. Later editions do have the proper Prime Minister.
Okay.
But I'm not sure it makes any difference. Yes. Yeah.
So, would you give us a quick autobiography and tell us when writing entered your life?
A quick autobiography. Well, I grew up in St. Louis. I was born in LA. Then my mom moved me back to St. Louis, and I grew up outside of St. Louis. Allison, or it's not Allison, it's Nancy, right? Do you remember anything about me as a child? Like, name one thing.
Well, I wasn't there, but I wouldn't be here if Janie had her way, because she took my mother's engagement ring.
That's true.
My mother had returned to my father, and because my mother had gotten mad at my father, they weren't engaged, they weren't married yet. And Janie took it, and then when they decided to reconcile, I think it was in the sandbox somewhere.
Yeah, I took it down the street to Judy Allen's house. She had a sandbox, and we played. And because I was quite absent-minded, I lost it. And I'm sure I admitted that I'd taken it, so it was found. But, you know, if you leave a diamond ring laying around, some little kid is going to pick it up, right? I hope it still has tiny particles of sand in it. Yeah, that was the story. So I grew up in St. Louis. I went to John Burroughs School, which was a private school. And then I went off to Yale. I went off to Vassar, but I quickly found myself a very tall boyfriend. And he went to Yale. He was on the basketball team. That's how I found him. And then after college, he and I, there were no jobs in 1970 when he graduated from college. So I had some money from the War Orphans Act from the Second World War. And we took that money and we hitchhiked around Europe for a year. And while we were on Crete, we applied to two schools, the University of Virginia and the University of Iowa. And he got into both, and I didn't get into either one. And so because he was from Wyoming, he chose to go to Iowa because it was closer, easier to get to Wyoming from there. And so once we got to Iowa, I really devoted myself to worming my way first into the English department and then into the writer's workshop. And after that, I taught at Iowa State and then made some money and moved to California. Isn't that what everybody does? So but you know, our family was very talkative and everybody told a lot of stories. And probably that's the reason I ended up as a novelist. Just gossip. Yeah.
What's your daily writing routine? Do you devote a certain period of time, or do you just sit down and let it flow?
Well, I get up. Once I'm up, it depends on my my horse trainer, because she has kids and she has a more strict schedule. So if she's going to be around in the afternoon, I write in the morning, and if she's going to be around in the morning, I write in the afternoon, and then I ride with her. And so I have 4 horses. I ride one of them always, and then another one sometimes, and then one is retired, and one is leased out to a little girl because she's a little girl type horse. And so that's how I do it. I have to say that the best moment of the day in the morning is when we decide what's for dinner. Because I really like to cook, and I really like to know what's for dinner. Yes?
In the process of writing the trilogy, at what point did the Osage Orange Hedge come to you? What's the genesis of that?
Well, you know, I had a house in Iowa for a while that had an Osage orange hedge, and it always fascinated me. And I had looked it up, and I knew how they got there, that British settlers or English settlers in the Midwest had thought that they were going to have hedged-in fields the way they had in England. And they of these Osage oranges, they said, oh, these are a good idea. And so once they planted them, they were incredibly hard to get rid of. And so they were here and there all over Iowa. You could see them from a distance. But in some ways, they were interesting and beautiful. And the plants were useful in some ways. You know, you could take an orange and run it across the woodwork of your house, and it was a good, not insecticide, but a good antiseptic and an insect repellent. So, you know, that's how I stuck the Osage orange head, because I wanted to get in some of that historical material without really talking too much about it. But that I thought was an interesting detail. Yeah.
One of your much older stories, Ordinary Love and Goodwill, has haunted me for a long, long time.
Uh-oh. Which one?
In a good way. The story of Goodwill, the one where the guy builds his life
Yeah.
with his two hands, and his son comes along and uses his free will to take it away from him.
Well, that was an interesting story because I needed some money. I had a house in the Catskills, and I needed some money. So a friend of mine who was an editor gave me a small amount to write a book called Catskill Crafts, and my job was to go around to various guys, most of them guys, some of them women, in the Catskills who made crafts for a living. And so that book came out. It's called Catskill Crafts. And the most interesting guy was a guy who was more up toward Albany, who made furniture. And mostly he used walnut. And he stained it himself. He would pick walnuts and he would put them in the driveway and drive back and forth over the walnuts. And then he would put that in some kind of chemical. That's how he made his stain. And he had a vacation house that was 10 miles from his regular house. And he was a genius. He was a total genius, because he didn't make new style furniture like some of my craftspeople. He replicated very elaborate 19th century furniture styles. And he and his wife had this one child. And so what I did was I imagined, and he didn't live an alternative lifestyle. He did make his furniture with planes and stuff like that, but he didn't live an alternative lifestyle. But I thought, okay, what if this family was living an alternative lifestyle? So that's how I came up with Goodwill.
I like how you exaggerated that into the character nicking each carrot seed the size of a grain of sand so that it would germinate.
Oh, thank you. A lot of the stuff I've written I haven't read in years, so I really don't know what most people are talking about, but I remember that one. Anybody else? Yes?
Excuse me, you did a really nice job with the reading of the soldiers in Rock, and without having, obviously you weren't a soldier over there.
No.
But you really captured a lot of sort of what it would be like to be over there. How did you do that? Did you read? Did you know someone?
I read. I didn't know anybody. I didn't ask. I know somebody, but I didn't ask. But I read a lot of stuff, and there's plenty of it.
Yeah.
I knew the history of the battles of 2005, and I looked at photographs of the cities, and I just did it the best I could, you know. And there's no different, you know. I haven't been to Vietnam either, and I haven't been to the Second World War either. But if I was going to have a war in every book, then I had to do my best. And I had some help on the Vietnam portion from my former husband, who was in Vietnam. But on these, I just sort of winged it and hoped for the best. But thank you. Yeah?
Did you find with the trilogy that you needed storyboards?
No.
Not at all. It's all in your head. That's amazing.
Well, the
Because I
characters,
need storyboards sometimes following all the.
I have needed storyboards in the past, but in this case, the characters were very distinct. And so since I knew them and I knew what year it was, and I knew how old they were, sometimes I had to remind myself exactly how old they were. And I knew where they were. I think I said that. Then I would decide what was going on with them. So no, I was pretty well organized. It was hard to keep track of some of the peripheral relatives, but you know, I did the best I could.
Thank goodness for the family tree.
Yes, thank you. That wasn't my idea, that was the publisher's idea. Thank you. Somebody else, oh yeah.
I'm curious about your book, 1,000 Acres. I was looking on the internet, and it was made into a movie, and there's some Hollywood stars that are acting in that movie. Were you pleased with the outcome or disappointed?
I was pleased with the check. You know, I've had only 2 Hollywood experiences. And so this one that was the idea of Jessica Lange and Michelle Pfeiffer, and they were the sort of movers behind the whole thing. And I'll never forget, I had a house in northern Wisconsin, and it was my husband's birthday, so it was June 10th. And as I went into the kitchen, so the house overlooked the lake, and we were eating out on the porch. And then you had to walk through the living room into the kitchen. As I went into the kitchen, the phone rang. The phone had a really long cord. So I started talking to my agent on the phone about how they were going to do the movie. It was really exciting, and Michelle Pfeiffer was interested, and Jessica Lange, and they were going to do it. The whole time I'm looking around for the birthday cake. And I'm walking around. Oh, I'm so glad. Oh, that's so great. I'm so excited. And then on the ground, on the floor, I see that there's a kind of a dark, watery spot. And then I realized that the Great Dane has attempted to get a hold of the birthday cake. And what he did was, and I don't know how he did this, he pulled it over to the edge of the dishwasher. And then it flipped and went top down into his water bowl, which was a big water bowl. And the water splashed. And that was why, as I was walking into the kitchen, he was slinking. And so after I said, oh, that's so wonderful, it's so wonderful. And I got off the phone and I went in and I said, honey, 1,000 Acres is going to be made into a movie, and we need to punish Hitchy for stealing the chocolate. And so we went and got the Great Dane. I carried the front end. Steve carried the back end. And he was like this. He was really good at passive resistance. And he was totally limp. And we carried him in, and we showed him his very bad act. And we spanked him like a if it made any difference. Great Danes are incredible thieves, and he loved chocolate. One time at Easter, he not only got the Easter basket off the table, but he got the imported chocolate out of the cellophane wrapper without tearing the wrapper. So he was good. The other one, Secret Lives of Dentists, was made from The Age of Grief. And they swiped the rights out from under my nose. They didn't pay me anything. They made the movie. They did not send me a free ticket. Eventually, when it went into distribution, they paid me what they owed me, but by that time it was like 5 years later. And I took my daughter to see it, and I loved it. So that's just the way Hollywood is. You know, every time is a nightmare of some kind, not but not every time. So
When did 1,000 Acres come out?
when did it come out? God knows, I don't know. Sometime maybe late 80s, something like that.
The movie was late?
Something like that. I still have the dress, and it has great big shoulder pads. So it must have been late 80s or something like that.
I've recently learned about the Greenlanders, and I haven't read it yet. I've read other things you've written, but the Greenlanders seems to be at least set in a surprising location. What motivated you to write it?
Well, the Greenlanders is set on the southern tip of Greenland between about 1360 and about 1410. And what motivated me was that I'd had a long-term interest in Icelandic literature. I had read the saga of the Greenlanders and another saga that touches on life in Greenland. I'd read almost all the Icelandic sagas. I'd taken Old Norse, and I'd spent a year in Iceland. And when I was in Iceland, I had a friend who was from Scotland, who was quite an adventurous guy, and he wanted to take a rowboat to Greenland. He was very excited about that. And he said that if you fell out of your rowboat in Greenland, you would freeze to death in 5 minutes. I said, wow, that is so interesting. And so I knew I wanted to write about the end of the world in Greenland, because I'd grown up in the 50s, and I'd always been afraid of mutually assured destruction. So I knew I had to write something about the end of a world. So this seemed perfect for writing about that. And so I wrote that that was published in '88. And it has a cult following. There's usually somebody in every audience who's read it and adores it, or somebody tells. One woman came up and said she'd read it 10 times. I said, "You're kidding, you poor thing." But it is one of my favorites, and I am very quite. And I went to Greenland to do a little research and looked around. So the photos in the book are photos that I took when I went to Greenland, just to give the reader a sort of image of what that landscape is like. So you had enough? Okay, yes, one more?
I'm curious, I'm sure you get put on prize committees now, so you have to read, young fiction or young, do you enjoy that process? Does it energize you, or does it seem like a chore?
Well, the main prize committee that I was on was the Man Booker International Prize 2009, which was a Lifetime Achievement Award. So most of my authors, or most of the authors that we had to read were not young. But we had to read a lot of their books. And I did quite enjoy that. There were authors that I had never heard of. There were authors that I wasn't too familiar with. There were authors that I was quite familiar with. And we had ended up giving the prize to Alice Munro. So we were ahead of the game. And on the short list was Mario Vargas Llosa. So we were way ahead of the game. That was enjoyable. Sometimes I've been on other prizes, but not for a while. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate that people do it. Yeah.
Will you name names and tell us who you like to read?
Well, yeah, if I can remember. I just did a thing today for the bookstore, a little video, word on words, or is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. And they asked for some books that I was reading. So I'm reading right now. I'm reading The Way We Live Now, which I've read before, Anthony Trollope. I'm reading Mary Beard's new book about Rome called SPQR. I'm reading, who else am I reading? See, I can never remember. I gave a really good review to a book this summer called Kitchens of the Great Midwest by J. Ryan Stradle. He's a young writer, so I think this is about his second book. It's quite good. You know, and I like a lot of history books, so maybe you should ask them what I'm recommending. One of the ones that I like to recommend a lot, because I love obscure books that suddenly pop up. And about 2 years ago, I spent a long time reading the Transylvanian trilogy by Miklos Banfi, which is about Hungary and Transylvania before the First World War. Banfi wrote it in the 30s. And it really is a wonderful evocation of a lost world that most of us know nothing about. I love that. I thought it was really good. So that's all I can think of at the moment. Yes?
Do you ever wake up and say, wow, I won a Pulitzer Prize?
No.
What did it mean to you when you won that?
You know, I was 4 months pregnant, so it was very exciting, but I couldn't do what others have done, which is suddenly go on a bunch of tours. You know, I got some flowers, and I realized that, you know, for the rest of my life, the first sentence of every article about me would be Pulitzer Prize winning author James Smiley, you know, is dead. So it's exciting, but it's just a thing. You know, I think that prizes are like bolts of lightning, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad, but the moment of it goes like that. And what you really have to do is enjoy writing the book. And if you focus on what prizes you might win or not, or didn't win or whatever, you'll be unhappy. And if you focus on the enjoyment of writing the book, you'll be happy. So that's my view. We could have one more, because it's only 7:10. You have to sit here till 7:15.
You mentioned your love of food and your character Alice in Duplicate Keys. Out of your books that I've read, I would say that she shares that, and I love that her reaction to her life being blasted by lightning in this way, this murder in this close friend circle is, I need to go to the deli at Sabar's.
Yeah, and have a nice pastrami on rye.
It's time to quit.
It's time
to quit living like a librarian in New York City and have some gourmet food.
Well, I love to eat, but I also love to cook. And so I love putting stuff together. And that's one, I don't like especially going to restaurants. I don't like just eating it. I like buying the stuff and putting it together and watching my husband eat it. My husband's from Philly, so of course he'll eat anything. And as is evidenced by, what is it, Scrapple? And so that's a great pleasure for me, to be able to cook and to be able to watch my husband enjoy himself and to eat. So we grew up in an eating family, wouldn't you say? Yeah, my grandmother was a great cook, and whenever she had nothing to do, she'd go in the kitchen and make fondant or divinity. She had a tremendous sweet tooth. And then my aunt always, this is how our family works, then my aunt said, well, she wasn't such a great cook. She just put butter in everything. But it was a good idea. So oh yeah, okay. Well, I grew up doing using the gourmet cookbooks. When I got married the first time, my first husband was 6'10", and he was a big eater. He was 6'10", 185 pounds. And So we got married and we lived in a farmhouse southwest of Iowa City. And every night, that we weren't in town, I would open up the gourmet cookbook and I would cook something out of the gourmet cookbook, which is how I learned to cook. And it always said each recipe was for 6. And he would eat enough for 4. And I would eat enough for 2. And that's how I learned to cook. And it was fun. Yeah.
You mentioned your daughter. Do you have one child or more? How many children?
No, I have 3 of my own, and my husband has 2, so we have 5 altogether between the ages of 37 and 22. So thank you all for coming.